To the United Nations now, where Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine was addressed once again today. Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, taking to the podium to mark the second anniversary of Moscow's aggression and to remind the world that the fighting and violations go on.
Our support is as much about Ukraine as it is about fighting for the rules that underpin our world. It is about the future that we share together, all of us. A future where might does not make right, where the rule of law is upheld in everything we do, where the difference between truth and lies is clearly understood, and where the institutions that we are building together are always respected.
Now, Ambassador Rae's speech follows a surprise visit by the Prime Minister to Kyiv this weekend. And while there, Justin Trudeau signed a cooperation agreement on security, committing Canada to over $2.7 billion in financial assistance to Ukraine, which includes $320 million for unspecified military spending. Well, joining us now is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae. Ambassador Rae, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you, Michael.
Listen, as Ukraine enters its third year of this war, it does face many challenges. We're talking about stretched resources for Ukraine, wavering support in the United States for the war effort, an enemy in Russia that seems undeterred by its own losses. How do you think Canada can best support Ukraine in this fight at this point in the war?
Well, I think we have to do a couple of things. The first thing is to do exactly what we're doing, and that is to clearly indicate to President Zelensky that we're there, that we're in the game, we're serious about wanting to support Ukraine, and that we understand that that's going to require a commitment of money for humanitarian and economic development, but also for military assistance, which we are continuing to provide. And the second thing is, I think we have to do a lot more to work with our NATO allies and everyone else to really persuade people that more has to be done. And I know that's certainly true with our American friends. We need to do everything we can to reach out to American public opinion and to the American political system, and say how important it is for all of us that we stick to our plans, that we stay together and stay in solidarity. I do think this next year is going to be critical for all of us. And I think we've sent the right signals in signing the security agreement with Ukraine, but I think we now have to we have to work even harder to make sure that we make more progress with ensuring that there is enough support for Ukraine.
Okay, you use the word critical. Why is this next year so critical?
Well, it's important to remember a couple of things. One is that Ukraine has lost a lot of its population. People have left Ukraine, not only the people who were in eastern Ukraine who were displaced by the Russians, but also the people who actually left the country, mainly to Eastern Europe, but also to Canada and elsewhere. And the population of Ukraine is under tremendous pressure. The economy is not doing well. They face tremendous challenges in terms of housing and education and basically the things that we need to be able to live reasonable lives. And that's putting pressure on morale in Ukraine. It's putting pressure on recruitment for the army. There's just a lot of things that need to be understood. We're in this for a tough reckoning with respect to Russia. That's not to say that Russia isn't suffering. Russia has also suffered a loss of population. Russia has suffered far more casualties on the military side than Ukraine has. But Putin doesn't care. He doesn't care about his own people. He just saw the death of Alexei Navalny was an example of how little he cares for democracy and for human rights and for the decent treatment of people. So we are dealing with an enemy who doesn't respond in the same way to human events as we do. We see the loss of life as tragic. We see it as something that we would desperately like to be able to change. And we think that this aggression, the kidnapping, all of the terrible things that Russia has done have created great hardship for the people of Russia as well as for the people of Ukraine. So I don't think it's to say that it's all bad news for Ukraine. It's not. Ukraine has done remarkably well to have been able to survive the onslaught from Russia, but we have to make sure that we take steps not simply to be on the defense, but to go be able to get land back and to regain some momentum in the war. And I think that's critically important.
Mm-hmm. So critically important, as you say. But as you stated yourself, though, here you have in Vladimir Putin a leader that does not react the way others have historically when it comes to Moscow and Russia. So where does that leave the United Nations? Because, time and again, we continue to hear that Russia has violated the rule-based order that has guided international relations for decades. But is that being punished in any way that has any meaning to Vladimir Putin if he doesn't react like others have? Or is Russia essentially creating a new normal for the world to adapt to?
Well, I think that's the risk, is that if we're not able to succeed in holding Putin accountable for what he's done, that this means it's going to be a heyday for dictators all around the world. And we need to understand that. That's when Canadians sometimes say to me, I get letters and emails from people saying, haven't we done enough? And my answer is no, we haven't, because we can't be satisfied and we can't rest until there is a reckoning of this situation, and not just a defense of Ukraine, but a victory for Ukraine. And I think increasingly it's important for us to talk this language and to be very candid about what the implications are of a victory for Vladimir Putin. Now, I don't take at face value, if people say, well, Putin isn't worried about anything, I think he is. I think he's desperate. And I think a lot of the measures that he's taking are a sign of his desperation. But I think we have to keep pushing, and pushing even harder than we've been pushing so far.
Is the United Nations' own viability at challenge here? If Putin continues this war, essentially unpunished by the world, if Russia can, on the Security Council, continue to veto resolutions, does it essentially create an existential crisis for the United Nations?
Well, I think the UN has been challenged since its inception. We have to recognize that the UN was set up at the end of the Second World War, before the Cold War really began. But as soon as the Cold War began, the powers of the world clearly made a decision that the common power, the ability to enforce the law, was not going to be given to the UN. And that's been our dilemma ever since. That's the dilemma we've been living with for 75 years. We need to give more collective ability to the UN to enforce the laws on climate change, the laws on biodiversity, all of the laws we all agree this is the direction we need to be going in as a world, but we're not giving the UN the means and the ability to enforce the laws that are in place. And nowhere is this clearer than in peace and security, because of the peculiar structure where we did collectively vetoes to 5 countries, one of which was the Soviet Union, the other one of which is China, United States, the UK, and France. And with that veto power, the Security Council has been, I think the delicate way to put it, severely limited in its ability to respond. The closer to the truth statement would be, it's left the Security Council paralyzed in the face of flagrant breaches of international law.
Over the weekend, the Prime Minister, as you know, was in Kyiv, and while there, he acknowledged this fear among Ukrainians that if there is, at the end of the day, negotiated peace between Russia and Ukraine right now, that détente would only give Russia a chance to regroup and try its invasion again. And to repeat, this is the fear amongst Ukrainians. So does that mean a negotiated end to this war is seen as a no-go right now?
How do you negotiate with Putin? How do you negotiate with a guy who says he wants to take over the whole country? And I think that's the critical problem. We tried this in the years before the Second World War, saying, well, let's make peace with Hitler. He really only just wants a little piece of this part of Poland or that part of Czechoslovakia. Why don't we just give him those little chunks? but the chunks were just the appetizer. And I'm afraid that what we're seeing in Ukraine is Eastern Ukraine and Crimea are just the appetizer for Russia. And so we have to be realistic. We have to be tough-minded about who we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a person who has a great track record in keeping his agreements, or with somebody who has any particular belief in the rule of law, or who understands what it means to not kidnap kids and do the terrible crimes against humanity that have been committed. So I'm not one of those people who's lining up to say, let's make a deal. I don't believe that it makes sense unless there's a dramatic turn in the way in which Russia presents itself to the world to say that let's make a deal with Putin. I mean, I think that's nuts, frankly.
Ambassador Rae, we're quickly running out of time here, but before you go, I do want to also ask your thoughts about the mass resignation that we saw in the West Bank today, the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister, along with his government, stepping down. How significant is this development, do you think, in terms of reviving hopes for a two-state solution in the Middle East?
Well, I think it's been a long time coming. I think that when a number of us were expecting there to be something in this direction. And I do think that, in order for there to be two states, there have to be two effective governments. And I don't think anybody can say that in the last while the Palestinian Authority has been able to do a great job. I do think there are serious financial issues for the authority and all sorts of other questions. I'm not simply pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just saying you need to have effective governance with experienced, practical people in charge in order to give people confidence on the other side that, yeah, this is in the cards, this is going in the right direction. So we'll just have to see what emerges in the next phase from a new potential new personnel in the government of the Palestinian Authority. But there's a long route to go. But two states is really the only effective way to ensure a long-term peace in the Middle East. Because going back to the early days, again, after the Second World War, that's when we all agreed that there have to be two states. And initially it was the Arab groups who rejected any Israeli state, any possibility for Israel to be self-governing. But we need Palestinian self-governance, and we need Israeli sovereignty, and we need Palestinian sovereignty in order to be able to create two effective states. But sovereignty implies being able to do things. And that, I think, is the steps that we need to see. And I think we have to do everything we can to support the evolution of that development. And I know that's the position the government is taking very clearly now.
Ambassador Bob Rae, again, always appreciate the time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.